The coolest thing of the decade, possibly the century, is about to happen and no one's talking about it, so I'm gonna start talking about it. So y'all have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope, right? Launched in the 90s, it broke, we fixed it, and it's gotten us some of the most insane pictures of space ever, like this, or the Hubble Deep Field. And if you don't know about the Hubble Deep Field, that deserves a whole nother video and I'll talk about it later. The successor to the Hubble, 3 times as large and way more technologically advanced, is about to be launched in December of this year. The James Webb Space Telescope will be sent up into space December 18th of 2021. With the tools and technology on the James Webb, we can see if there's life on the exoplanets that we've discovered. If there's life in other solar systems. We can also see if there's light from before the Big Bang. That's the whole reason why we're looking up. You know what I mean? I'm gonna start crying. This is one of the most fascinating feats this generation will achieve. And I feel so lucky to be alive when this is happening.
The new discovery in wave particle physics, quantum entanglement, may be a warning that NASA's new James Webb Telescope will vaporize the universe.
And not so ironically, this story starts with a ray of light. In 1801, a physicist named Thomas Young put a small plate with a couple of slits in it in his window to see what would happen to the light coming into the room. And what he found, to everyone's amazement, because all the other physicists at the time were sure that light was made of particles, he saw a wave interference pattern on the screen behind the slits. Like what would happen to a wave of water if it were to pass through those 2 slits. But this was light, and so this seemed to confirm that light was a wave. Fast forward over a century to a point where technology allowed to fire a single photon in an experimental setting, at which point they said, let's try that double slit thing again. What happened when they fired 1 photon at a time at the 2 slits that should have revealed a BB gun pattern of double slits behind the screen? They got the wave interference pattern again with 1 photon at a time. And to them, this is impossible. They're like, what the f***? One particle shouldn't be able to create a wave interference pattern. How does the one particle interfere with itself? So what they came up with was that the photon traveled through both slits simultaneously in what's called superposition of all possibilities. But that was too weird and they just couldn't let that go. So they're like, hey, let's figure this out. So they put some sensors in the loop to figure out at least which slit was being used by the photon. And this is where things got even weirder. Because when they measured which slit the photon was actually going through, that's when they got the 2 slit pattern on the back of the screen like a BB gun had fired through it. And here's where it got crazy. When they measured which photon the slit went through, they got the 2 slit BB gun pattern. But when they didn't measure which slit it went through, they got the wave interference pattern with 1 photon at a time. And all the smartest physicists in the world were like, and within those world-leading expert physicists, 2 camps of thought developed. A vast minority of super genius Nobel Prize-winning physicists said, aha, this is where consciousness comes into the picture in quantum mechanics. Because when this wave function of the single photon passing through all possibilities is observed, it collapses into 1 photon and makes the BB pattern. But the other, much more highly populous camp of physicists said, the wave function of the particle collapsed when we measured it, dumbasses. And the vast majority of physicists are still in this camp today. And here is where they get proven wrong. Enter the quantum eraser. The quantum eraser proves that a collapse of a wave function from a wave into a particle is not due to a measurement effect. Because in a quantum eraser setup, every photon that travels through the system gets measured. Every one of them. Every particle should show up as a BB gun pattern of 2 slits on the screen behind it. But they don't. And you can decide when they don't even long after the experiment is over. And all you have to do to change the result from the double slit back to the wave interference pattern is erase the data on the hard drive from the measurements that were taken. When you erase not the measurement, but the data from the measurement itself, it turns the particles back into waves backwards in time. Because ultimately, it's whether the researchers can view the data or not that decides whether or not the wave function collapses into a particle. So consciousness for the win. Consciousness is a non-local field, and we are all conscious creatures that are tied into that field. So what would you call an infinite field of intelligent consciousness with the ability to create the whole universe moment to moment, which by the way gives us our own consciousness as a local expression of the whole thing?